Hey guys, welcome to the screencast. In this particular one, I'm going to be going over chapter 6 of our text, An Introduction to Metabolism, and its connection to our AP Biology College Board Unit 3. So, Unit 3 on the College Board is called Cellular Energetics. Some people call it Bioenergetics, same thing. So, the text that kind of coordinates with that is going to be mainly from this chapter for us. I'm going to be going into section 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 and part of 6.4 on this one. So this is going to get us through some concepts of metabolism, different types of reactions, endergonic, exergonic reactions, and then lead up to the discussion of our most important topic of enzymes. And so it's like really important to get kind of a strong foundation about energy so that you have a better understanding of how enzymes function to keep living things alive. So basically, on the energy of life, we're all made up of cells. Like all living organisms are made up of cells, and they're like little chemical factories. And cells have to be really energy efficient. Every cell has energy demands, things that the cell needs to do. And so there's got to be ways that the organism or the cells individually can complete their task and get the energy they need. And so there's a really cool picture related to this topic, and you might see one of these, in a textbook or on one of our hyperdocs. And so I think it's cool looking at bioluminescence and some of these organisms that can create this color that really stands out. And it's just a really cool picture that illustrates a lot of biology going on at one time. So whether we were getting into cell communication or we're talking about the enzymes that make this possible, and how controlled the reactions and the metabolic process have to be. Like it's a really, really cool thing that's put together in order for these organisms to show off this lot. So you'll hear me talk about that a little bit more. On concept 6.1, I really think when you're looking at the section titles or the concept titles, the section title is a huge deal. So you should definitely spend some time if you're studying over your notes later, like literally just looking at the 3 to 4 section titles or concept titles that these parts of your text are named after. They're really good. So, first of all, an organism's metabolism transforms matter and energy. So, to get a handle on the phrase metabolism, metabolism is like the sum total of all chemical reactions in an organism. So, it's all of the buildup and it's all of the breakdown that occurs within an organism. And so, within a metabolic pathway, if you hear like metabolism in reference to this pathway is going to start with specific molecules and end with specific molecules. And the ones we end with are called products. And in an example of a metabolic pathway, you might see like multiple reactions, and each reaction would be catalyzed by an enzyme. So, this figure is kind of showing that you'll have the starting molecule or reactant, and you'll have this final ending product D. But along the way, there's certain enzymes that metabolize or that speed up reaction number 1, reaction number 2, and reaction number 3. Um, there's 2 different types of metabolic pathways. You're going to hear catabolism and anabolism. And so I said again that metabolism was like the sum total of chemical reactions within an organism, all the buildup and breakdown. Catabolic pathways or catabolism is referencing all the breakdown stuff. So in catabolic pathways, molecules are being broken down. So we're moving from like polymers to monomers. And when that process happens, there's a release of energy. We would call that like free energy. You'll see that later, but a release of free energy that could potentially do work. And so, an example of a catabolic pathway, which again is not one single reaction, but it's multiple reactions, that are catalyzed by different enzymes. But an example would be cell respiration because we're taking glucose and then it's being broken down, or it might not be glucose, but for the most part, in cell respiration, glucose is going to be the organic material that's being broken down. So glucose is getting broken down, and in the process, energy is being released in that breakdown. So we're taking organic compounds and we're breaking them down to provide energy to do work. So there's a lot of different work that the cell needs to do. Like an example might be pumping sodium or potassium across the cell membrane, like against its gradient. Or it might be muscle contractions, for example. But that's just a couple examples of work that a cell can do when energy is released from a catabolic pathway where polymers are broken down to monomers or smaller pieces. On the opposite end, an anabolic pathway is going to use energy instead of releasing energy. This one is going to, and I'm not saying catabolism doesn't require energy. I didn't say that, but anabolic pathways are consuming energy and they're building polymers from monomers. So they're taking smaller pieces, putting them together to build these more complex polymers. And in doing so, they're basically storing the energy into the compound that's being made or into the product that's being made. So, an example here that should be familiar all the way back from Unit 1 is like protein synthesis. And so, single amino acids are covalently bonded together. And as that happens, we would see an anabolic pathway where we have a larger polymer built from monomers. And I think that is also a good point to kind of pause and think about some of the reaction names that are familiar to you. So if I go back to catabolism, we should be using, like if we were playing the metabolism game in class, this is where you might play your hydrolysis card on somebody, because that reaction is going to split apart these polymers into monomers. And in order to do anabolism, you would be playing that dehydration synthesis card. So those are the reactions involved in these pathways. Okay, bioenergetics is basically the study of how energy flows through living organisms. And so when someone references bioenergetics, if they said, "Hey, what are you studying in biology?" and someone says bioenergetics, they're probably talking about enzymes, photosynthesis, and respiration. So those are like the really big ticket items in College Board's AP Biology Unit 3. And that's what you're going to see moving forward for us with a really focused look at enzymes. Okay, before we can just jump straight into enzymes, though, we need to have some understandings of some principles of energy and types of energy. So, just getting started, like having a agreed upon definition for energy. Like, energy is basically the ability to do work, or in this text, it's called the capacity to cause change. So, we're talking about changing matter. So, again, the ability to do work or the capacity to cause change. And there's lots of different types of energy. You'll hear me talk about ATP as the cell's form of energy that is ultimately needed in order to do work within the cell. But there's lots of different types of energy. And so the two most common types students walk in with knowledge about is like potential energy and kinetic. So I'm going to kind of ping pong back and forth between this slide and this one. So let's talk about potential first. So potential energy would be like energy that matter possesses because of its location. So like you might see a picture of someone holding up something above their head or someone at the end of a diving board in just a moment. It's got potential energy because of its position, okay? Where kinetic energy is associated with movement. And so if we've got kind of a foundational understanding of potential and kinetic, it might be easier to kind of attach these other types that you see beside that phrase. So if I go here back to potential energy, chemical energy is potential energy. And it's energy that, let me say that again. Chemical energy, I'm going to read this off, is potential energy available for release in a chemical reaction. So when I read that, I think of that glucose molecule that we referenced earlier that might be broken down during an anabolic pathway. So it has energy stored inside of it. So there is potential energy inside of that glucose molecule. On the other hand, when we're talking about kinetic energy and the energy of movement, heat is definitely something that comes to mind. Heat is a form of thermal energy. So, like when we're talking about thermal energy, we're talking about the arrangement, movement of molecules, depending on the temperature. And so heat is an example of thermal energy, and it can be transferred. And we obviously need heat to drive reactions. And then we brought up fireflies earlier. And so light itself is another type of energy that some organisms can actually emit, which is really, really cool. And I don't know if I mentioned it. I don't think I did, but Great Smoky Mountains, which we don't live too far away from, I've never gone. I absolutely have it on my bucket list to go, but apparently I believe it's in June that it happens, they have this incredible biological event. If it happened during school, we would totally be trying to take like a field trip here. But they have like a synchronized firefly. I don't know what I was going to say, situation, whatever, but like it's synchronized. It's an annual occurrence where all these fireflies kind of synchronize together. Really, really cool. I definitely want to see it, but it happens in June. You should look it up. And it's really special for people that get to see it because you have to get certain tickets to be able to see it in certain areas. Okay, moving on. I referenced picture of someone standing on a diving board or someone diving, so we can kind of see examples of potential and kinetic energy here. And yeah, that brings us to the laws of energy transformation, thermodynamics, and two laws that we need to focus on. So thermodynamics is a study of energy transformations, and we are going to be focusing on the first and second law. Again, this is just really basic stuff. We're not getting really heavy and deep into the laws. But the first law is basically that energy can't be created nor destroyed, but it can be transferred or transformed. Okay, so energy can't be energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred or transformed. So it can be moved from molecule to molecule, but you're not making more of it, and you're not getting rid of it. All right, sorry, jumping back in. All right, so let's move forward with this. So this picture is actually showing both the first and the second law. The first one I've already mentioned a couple times. So like you're seeing this bear eating his food, and so energy has been transferred from the food to the bear. But then in the second law of thermodynamics, this is more about entropy, or entropy is just another word for disorder. So every time that energy gets transferred or transformed, like we talked about, like it can't be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred. Every time energy is transferred or transformed, it increases the disorder or the entropy of the universe, so to speak. And heat is a big deal here. So I'm probably going to circle back to that picture so you can see that heat coming off. But saying that heat is lost is not the same thing as energy is being destroyed. So we're not saying energy is being destroyed. We're saying as energy is transferred and that disorder increases as energy transfers occurs, that some of the energy is lost in a usable form. And I'm not saying heat can't do any work, but it's pretty hard to harness heat, especially within biological organisms, to do a considerable amount of work. So heat increases the disorder of the surroundings. So you'll see that here. As metabolism occurs, the disorder increases, and heat is an example of that. Okay, you're going to see this word not only here, but it's going to pop up in the next section. So I'll just speak to the word spontaneous or non-spontaneous just a little bit. Spontaneous in my mind sometimes sounds like unexpected or sudden or quick. It's not what we mean here. So I want you to think of spontaneous in terms of like thermodynamics is energy favorable, and a non-spontaneous reaction would not be energetically favorable. So spontaneous reactions occur without energy input. Remember, biological organisms have to have enough energy for survival. So it's like this cash in, cash out kind of situation that the spontaneous reactions would happen without having extra energy that has to be input into the system in order to make them happen. So they're energetically favorable in that sense. And the non-spontaneous reactions, there has to be an input of energy in order to make those actually happen. Um, I think that pretty much wraps us up for section 1. And the next topic is going to be this one that you're seeing on the screen, 6.2, related to free energy. And the free energy change of a reaction is going to tell us whether or not the reaction occurs spontaneously.